UFC Long Island betting and Draftkings show. Once again, guys, I do apologize for the quality. This will be my last video away from the normal studio, and then next week we'll be back in the lab cooking up something nice for you guys. But I didn't want to skip a video each week, so that's why I'm doing this, even though it's low quality. And again, the disclaimer, I'm not a diehard Eagles fan, I promise. So keep that hate to yourself in the comments. No, just kidding. But we do have a fun card, 12 fights. This is a really fun card, a lot of good betting spots, and it's a pretty fun DraftKings slate as well. So I'm excited to talk about it with you guys, and hopefully we can identify some good spots this weekend. Kicking things off, we have Emily Ducati going up against Jessica Penne. Ducati's a -150 favorite. The comeback on Penne is +130. And this is one that I don't have a ton of interest in terms of DraftKings. I'm not betting the fight either, but I do expect Ducati to win here. She's making her UFC debut. She's on a 3-fight win streak, previously fought over in Invicta. She's faced some decent competition, doesn't have a great record, but she has an okay skill set. I don't think she's like a superstar prospect by any means, but I do think she has some skills that we can take advantage of Penne with here. For starters, I think Ducati's going to have a clear striking advantage. You know, she's got a decent 1-2. She's not a ton of volume on the feet, but she does have powerful leg kicks, decent 1-2 combination. She comes from a Taekwondo background. She's a black belt in Taekwondo, a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as well. And that's really my biggest knock on her, is because she's so confident in her grappling that she's able to be taken down and she's willing to fish off her back for submissions. And the problem with that, why we don't like that, is because 9 times out of 10, you know, against a high-level fighter or a fellow black belt in Jessica Penne, that submission probably won't more times than not materialize. And if it doesn't, then you're typically losing minutes because you're spending majority of the round on your back. It's just, it doesn't have good optics for the judges. So that's my concern with her. But I do still think she has advantages here against Penne. Penne's really just, she's going to try and get in close, stick to you like glue, like she did against Lupe Godinez. She's coming off a first-round armbar finish over Karolina Kowalkiewicz, which, I mean, it's impressive, but at the same time, we've seen Karolina make a ton of mistakes like that and put herself in bad spots scrambling. I don't really expect Ducati to do that as well. Like I said, a black belt in jiu-jitsu. So I think this one will be competitive in the grappling realm. Maybe Penne can stick close to her, bully her in the clinch a little bit and make it, you know, kind of dicey, but I just expect the striking to be clearly in favor of Ducati here. So close fight. I'm not interested in laying chalk, but I do think she wins. And in terms of DraftKings, I just think there's better fights up and down the card. And up next, we have Dwight Grant going up against Dustin Stoltzfist. Dwight Grant, a slight favorite now at -135. Stoltzfist on the comeback at +115. And this is my first bet of the week. I bet Dustin Stoltzfist at +135 for a unit. And basically, I'm just almost always going to take the guy who I think is A, going to be more aggressive, but also B, going to have a pretty clear grappling edge, in my opinion. And Stoltzfist, yes, he's not super talented, but let's be honest, neither is Dwight Grant. Dwight Grant, historically speaking, is constantly going to split decisions because even in fights that he should be winning, he just doesn't do enough or makes it close and tends to get hurt at the wrong moments time and time again. I mean, it's like the last, I want to say, what is it, four or 5 times he's gone to decision. Every single one's been a split. And that's why. It's because he's low volume on the feet. So outside of like really clipping his opponents, which yes, he is capable of doing that. He does have power when he does let his hands go. But this one is up at 185. So I don't know if his power is going to translate all that well against Dustin Stoltzfist, who, you know, I don't think he's chinny by any means. And what's encouraging about Stoltzfist is, you know, that Miesha Tate fight, yes, he got submitted, but he looked pretty good early in that fight, was probably on his way to getting the decision victory if he didn't get submitted. And I don't think Dwight Grant's really much of a submission threat here. I do expect Stoltzfist to grapple. He landed, what was it, 4 takedowns, I think, in that fight. His last couple fights, he's definitely shown a more willingness to wrestle, which I like to see because he does come from a kickboxing and grappling background. And I'm not saying he's a great grappler by any means, but I do think he's the more dangerous of the two in terms of the submission grappling. And again, Grant is just a guy who just always seems to get himself hurt. And now he's like getting up there in age as well. Like, I don't trust his durability at all. Moving up a weight class against a guy who I think is going to throw more volume and have a grappling edge, I'm going to take the dog shot there. So like I said, I backed Stoltzfist for a unit at +135, currently +115. I'd probably take a little stab at any plus money on Stoltzfist. I do think there's a real possibility he looks like a hindsight favorite in this matchup. Next fight up is an interesting one. We have Dustin Jacoby against Dott and Jung. And this one I say is interesting because coming into the week or prior to this week, you know, I was talking with a few buddies. I'm like, yeah, I think I like Dott and Jung here. And I was likely going to bet him. I didn't bet him at the time. And then I dug into the matchup. And the more I dug into it, I was less confident on Jung. And the reason why is because, you know, people are going to point to, oh, well, he was outstruck by Sam Alvey in 10 minutes or whatever, two of those 3 rounds. You know, I'm not going to dwell on that. Obviously, it wasn't his best performance, but he at least had the fight IQ to realize he was probably down and hunting a finish there. But there are some things I like about him. Obviously, he's got the knockout power, but it's also the wrestling, which should be key in this matchup. Dustin Jacoby, you can take this guy down, defends at under 60% in the UFC. We saw Ian Kudalaba have a lot of success, not so much holding Dustin Jacoby down, but certainly getting him down. And that's the positive note on the Jacoby side, is he is good at working back to his feet. Yes, he's probably going to give up a couple takedowns if that's in the game plan for Dott Jung here, but he's good at working back to his feet. And in terms of the striking, I do favor the Jacoby side because I know he's probably going to throw more volume. He's going to mix in the leg kicks, beat up the legs of Dott Jung. And I think he's probably getting the better of the exchanges outside of the big power shot. And that's really, you know, the variable here is like Dott Jung. Yes, he could get outlanded, but if he lands a big power shot, that might swing the round if the round is competitive enough, even if he's not having a ton of success with the wrestling. But I just think the upside is on the Jung side here. But now the reason why it makes it even more interesting is because the line just swung. The line flipped. Dott Jung was like plus 110. At times, I think he was, plus 130, plus 140. Now it's just been coming in all on the Jung side. He is now a minus 125 favorite. And Jacoby, the small underdog at plus 105. So if you like the Jacoby side, I think you just wait because this has been pretty much one-way action, since the beginning of the week. So you can probably get a decent number on Jacoby. The problem with backing Jacoby is because you're just like hoping for a boring 29-28 type decision, maybe a 30-27 if he wins those rounds convincingly, but I'm not sure that he has the power to. It's just you're relying on volume and him basically trying not to be taken down, getting the better of the exchanges. So I don't love this fight. Like I said, I do think all the upside is on the Jung side, finishing ability, wrestling ability. So he's my preferred play on DraftKings, but this is looking like it's going to be a no bet for me since I missed the early price on Dott Jung here. Next fight up is Bill Aljeo going up against Herbert Burns. Aljeo is a minus 170 favorite. Herbert Burns on the comeback at plus 145. And this one is funny because it's like, I really do like Bill Aljeo. I think this is a pretty good matchup for him here. The problem is, like, I expect him to be winning basically all the minutes. It's just that I do think there's a real possibility he could get submitted here. And I know he's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's been able to fight out of a lot of compromising positions. But I kind of keep going back to is that he keeps putting himself in compromising positions. He's very easy to be taken down, but he's good at working back to his feet. He's never accepting position. Those things I like about him. But for those guys that are good at working back to their feet, a lot of times it's because they're capable and sometimes confident enough to give up their neck. And that's what he does is he gives up his back. He gives up his neck when he's fighting back to his feet. And if you do that against a guy as aggressive and highly credentialed as Herbert Burns is in terms of the grappling, like Herbert Burns is historically a guy that I kind of rate as round one sub or bust or round one finisher bust. If you want to talk about the Nate Landwehr fight when he landed that heavy knee, but he's just not a guy that has a ton of power outside of like a fluke heavy knee like that. But the grappling, I do rate pretty highly. And I do think he's the more dangerous of the two in terms of the grappling. And if Bill Aljeo does give up a couple takedowns here and gives up his back, then I think he could be in trouble. But outside of that, like I really strongly favor Aljeo in rounds 2 and round 3. So it really comes down to me is that first exchange where he is taken down. And I do expect Herbert Burns to probably get a takedown or two early in this fight. If he survives those, then I think that's going to be a telltale sign that he's going to be fine for this matchup because he throws way more volume on the feet. I rate him as a much better striker. Like I said, he's a fellow black belt as well. He just tends to get himself in some tricky spots, which like he's been able to survive, but at the same time, you don't want to be doing that against a high level black belt in Herbert Burns. So in terms of DraftKings, I'll have exposure to both sides, but I do think Bill Aljeo gets his hand raised. Bill Aljeo by decision is the official pick. Next up, we have Jack Shore going up against Ricky Simon. Jack Shore, a -160 favorite. Ricky Simon on the comeback at +140. And this one is probably, I put up a tweet earlier in the week that this is the most anticipated fight of the entire card. I probably misspoke there because we do have Burgos, Jourdain. We have the main event, which should be a banger as well. I probably should have phrased it as the most debated fight this week because there's been a lot of chatter really on both sides. It seems like a lot of what I would classify as the sharp betting community is on the Ricky Simone side, myself included. I backed Ricky Simone for 2 units at +135. I'm considering adding come Saturday. We'll see, where the line goes. It danced up to +150 at times. I wasn't able to get in there. But if it goes back there again, I'll certainly add a unit. I do think, credit to Jack Shore, man. I've cashed 2 of my biggest bets ever on Jack Shore. So I'm not going to knock the guy. Undefeated Welsh prospect. He's got the grappling. His striking is not as bad as people want to say it is. But I do think this is just a really, really bad stylistic matchup for Jack Shore because I do expect him to be the better striker, but I don't think it's going to be by much. Like, yes, he does have the more crisp boxing. He can mix in the leg kicks as well. But in terms of the grappling, that's where I don't see him having as much success as he has in similar matchups. You look at the guys that he's beaten, Nohelin Hernandez, who was that guy on The Ultimate Fighter that he beat? Ludovic Shalinian or Ludovic, I can't think of the dude's name, but just the level of competition pretty low overall. And then you see as he starts to get tested against not even like good guys in the division, just not bottom of the barrel guys. And it starts to be less of a blowout in terms of the fight. You look at the Hunter Azure fight. And at the time, that was the biggest bet that I had ever placed was on Jack Shore there. I bet him. I think that was a 5-unit max play for me when he fought Hunter Azure. And yes, he did win, but the rounds were pretty competitive. And I'm not going to say that Azure should have won that fight, but it was certainly close. And I just think this is kind of similar where he's going up against a guy who does have a wrestling background in Ricky Simone, who is going to be more physically imposing than basically anybody that he's ever fought. And when you talk about Shore's game, it's like, yes, he does have a little bit of striking, but he wants to get in close. He wants to cage push. He wants to drag you to the mat, implement his grappling. He's not going to be able to do that against Ricky Simone. Ricky Simone, we're talking about a guy that ragdolled Ray Borg, who's a much better wrestler, in my opinion, than Jack Shore. So it's like, I don't really see how Jack Shore is going to be the clear -160 favorite here. At best, I think this is like a coin flippy type of fight. And then you're hoping that the judges kind of score rounds for Shore. But I mean, if he goes out there and like dominates Ricky Simone, it would be one of the more surprising things maybe that I've ever seen in MMA, because I really rate Simon as the better wrestler of the two. And I just think the overall strength advantage is going to be in the Simon camp. And yes, I mentioned Shore should have a slight striking advantage, but it's not like I think he's going to be blowing him out. Like, Shore doesn't put a ton of volume out there. Ricky Simone got clipped by Uriah Faber, whatever. Like, I'm pretty much throwing that out completely. And I just think the strike will be somewhat close, lean Jack Shore there. But if he's not able to get a knockdown or a finish, like, I think it's going to be Simone coming up with the better sequences in terms of the wrestling, the grappling. I expect Simone to be the one landing takedowns. So give me Ricky Simon +135 for 2 units. And like I said, I'll be looking to add if it does go back in the +150 range. Next fight up is going to be Puna Hill Soriano -260. The comeback on Dalka Lungaimbola is +220. And this one's pretty straightforward to me. Like, I think both guys are powerful. Both guys kind of have suspect gas tanks, but I do favor the Soriano side really in both aspects. I think he's a much more powerful hitter, even though Dalka looks to be like super, super jacked, and he is, and he does have power. But I think when Soriano lands, it makes more of an impact. I trust his power a little bit more. I trust his durability a little bit more. Like, I don't really trust Dalka's chin all that much. And then we saw against Cody Brundage, like, he was having a ton of success early, and then he just completely gassed out, got himself finished there. So the fight IQ is not even really there either. Only 2-3 since coming over to the UFC. So he's just not a guy that I put a ton of faith in. So outside of like a big knockout punch, like, I don't see him beating Soriano. I would expect Soriano to actually be the one that finds a finish here. So Soriano by knockout's the official pick. Maybe take some shots on the underdog on DraftKings, but outside of that, really no interest for me. Next fight up is going to be Miesha Tate, minus 170. The comeback on Lauren Murphy is plus 145. And actually, that's outdated because Tate has taken some love. She's a minus 205 favorite. Lauren Murphy on the comeback at plus 175. If this one keeps going, I might get involved here. And, I was kind of writing this fight off because it's like, yeah, I guess I favor Tate, but I don't have a ton of interest and I don't want to lay chalk on Miesha Tate. But now that she's minus 210, like I'm starting to think there's a case to be had for Lauren Murphy here coming off the loss to Valentina Shevchenko. I just think Murphy, while I've kind of, not talked bad about her in the past, but I think she did get a couple lucky breaks to be on that win streak there. A couple fights that I didn't think she probably won. They were close fights though. And I expect this to be a close fight because Lauren Murphy is just super gritty. It's not that Miesha Tate's like all that overwhelming. Like I do think the striking is going to be super competitive, super close. There's not going to be a clear favorite in the striking, I don't think. And then in the grappling, I think Miesha Tate's better, but I still think Murphy might be able to have a little bit of success as well. Like I just think it's going to be one of those women's MMA, and we see the underdog make these fights a lot more competitive than they tend to be in the line. So I expect Murphy to make this one competitive. As of now, no bet for me. But if people keep blowing out this Tate line, then maybe we get involved for a small bet on Murphy. And next fight up's Shane Burgos, the minus 170 favorite. The comeback on Charles Jourdain is plus 150. And this one, or actually this one has moved since just a little bit ago, minus 165 and plus 140. So Shane Burgos, I favor the Burgos side. There's reason why I haven't bet him yet, and I still might come Saturday, especially if Jourdain keeps creeping in here. But it really worries me when you see guys that have eaten a lot of shots and have been knocked out before. And obviously he had the really scary knockout against Edson Barbosa where it was the delayed, like backed up against the cage, whatever. Like that's not something that I feel great about in terms of durability. Like when you have a guy in Shane Burgos that relies on head movement, that eats a lot of punches. And over the course of his career, he was durable enough to walk through those punches and keep moving forward like a zombie and throwing a ton of volume and landing powerful shots of his own. I do still think he's capable of doing those things. And he is my pick in this fight. But I still worry a little bit laying chalk on a guy like that who at any moment, like if they do get hit big, like you just don't know if the durability is going to be there, just because, life that could be life-changing type of damage that he's taken. So I know his durability checked out against Billy Quarantillo, but I do think Jourdain, packs a mean punch. He's got the heavy leg kicks as well. So there are some things to worry about here. And I do know guys, some guys that I respect are on the Jourdain side. I'm on the Burgos side personally. Like I said, I haven't bet him yet, but I'm probably going to come Saturday. It's just a matter of not, getting too ballsy, I guess I'll say, because while I'm confident he wins if he's the Burgos we know and love, he's in his home state of New York, so he's going to have the crowd behind him. I do think Burgos puts on a show, but I do think there are at least some risk on the Shane Burgos side. So that's really my only caution. But if you're like me, you're probably going to just degen and YOLO it anyway on our guy Shane Burgos. Next fight up, Sue Madarchy against Matt Schnell. Madarchy, the big favorite, minus 260. Schnell on the comeback at plus 220. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one because I do think Madarchy is the clear favorite here. I expect him to be the better striker at range. I expect him to be the more powerful striker. And that's really the big thing is like a lot of these Madarchy fights, it's like he's either most of the time going to knock you out or beat you striking, or if you can grapple even a little bit and get him to the mat, then he's at a risk to get submitted. And that's kind of how I see this fight, is like the budget version of Justin Gaethje, Charles Oliveira, where like the Walmart version, because I think that Madarchy is powerful on the feet. He's got a bunch of knockouts, and Schnell has been knocked out multiple times. Schnell is pretty fragile, makes some mistakes on the feet. If he eats a big shot, I think he's going to sleep here. And then on the flip side, Schnell is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's got a lot of submissions on his record. It's not that I think he's this overwhelmingly great grappler, but Madarchy has been submitted in all of his professional losses. And if Schnell could just somehow force one or two of those exchanges, then I do think he would be live to pull off the submission here. So my favorite play on this one is the under. That's going to be another look for me. I haven't bet it yet. I think I saw minus 140. Yeah, minus 140s are still out there on under 2.5. And then I think fight to end inside the distance is like minus 155. So either of those I think are decent looks. I'll probably have something like that towards the end of the week, just because I think the dynamic of these two leads to a finish more times than not. Next fight up, we have Muslim Salikov against Jinglang Li. And this one, I got to say, I think Lee's a live dog here. I'm not picking him to win, but I do think that there's value on the money line. And I do think he's got much more upside in terms of the grappling, in terms of DraftKings as well. Like Muslim Salikov, he's got the decision over Trinaldo last year. Like he doesn't fight a ton. He's on a 5-fight win streak, but some of those got a little bit dicey. He's obviously got the high level kickboxing background, the king of kung fu or whatever they call him. 12 of his 18 wins have come by knockout. He's low output on the feet, but he does pick his spots pretty well. So it's like, even in these fights that are close, you know, he's landing some good spots. Even if he's not landing a ton, he's putting in some big shots. The concern with him is I don't think his defensive grappling is great. I don't think his cardio is even all that great. And he recently turned 38 years old. So there's a lot of red flags for a guy that's not super active. He's getting older. He's low volume, not finish reliant, just because he's got a really strong decision record. He's either like 4-0 or 4-1 or something like that in decisions. And I think a big part of that is because a lot of times, even if he's not doing a ton, like I said, he's low output, but he's also pretty solid defensively. So even when he's not necessarily doing a ton or landing a ton of volume, he does make it difficult for his opponents to get off damage on him or really make it look like they're having much success at all against him. So he kind of just turns fights boring. If he doesn't land, you know, one of his big knockout blows, he will throw spinning attacks out there. But outside of that, like he kind of just turns these fights, if they stay in the striking realm, into these low volume, patient, you know, the other guy doesn't want to take too much risk. Salikov stays sound defensively and ends up getting the better 2 or 3 shots around. So that's why I say it's like, I don't like him as a fighter, but he is good at the way that he fights, even though it may not be the most entertaining. But on the Jinglang Li side, I do think it's a buy low spot coming off the first round submission against Khamzat Chimaev. I was at that fight at Fight Island, and obviously not the result that Jinglang Li wanted. An impressive win for Khamzat there, but I do think this is a possible bounce back spot for him because he's not a bad striker. I think the striking can be somewhat competitive. I think he'll have to eat a couple shots here, but historically speaking, he's very durable. The way that you get him out of there is typically by submitting him. So it might come down to where the striking is kind of low volume and competitive, and Jinglang Li maybe lands a takedown or two, has a little bit of grappling success. So that's why I think he is live in this fight. I don't know. We'll see come Saturday. I might back my guy. I am a fan of Jinglang Li. So I might just back him as a fan, but I think the most likely outcome is kind of one of those boring Salikov edges, a close but low volume decision. But nobody likes that. So we'll be rooting for our guy Jinglang Li this weekend. Next fight up is going to be Amanda Lemos, Michelle Watterson. This one I've seen a lot of Michelle Watterson love out there, and I get it in the sense that Lemos, big favorite, typically finish reliant, better competition, obviously coming off the knock or the submission loss to Jessica Andrade in the first round there. But really the story of Lemos's career is like she has, you know, real fight stopping power, probably the heaviest hitter, pure hitter in terms of power in this entire division, I'd say. But outside of that, you know, the Angela Hill fight I think is a good fight to reference here because it's like she had a ton of success early in rounds 1. And then she slows down. She doesn't land as much volume. The power starts to go at least a little bit. And it's like she really is not a good fighter to cover this type of a price tag when you're talking about somebody in Michelle Watterson who's fought the best of this division. And I've never considered Watterson as like the elite tier, but she's certainly held her own at times. Like she's not winning these fights, but she's not getting blown out either. I mean, outside of like, there's been a few where she was blown out, but I'd be surprised if Lemos is able to blow her out for 15 minutes when Watterson's historically very durable. We've seen her go 5 rounds multiple times. I don't think Lemos is going to cover this price tag, so I don't hate the Watterson stab, like a small bet on the underdog. I'm personally not going to do it because I don't think we can trust Watterson, even though she has the cardio advantage. I'm not even sure she can make it convincing enough to win those rounds down the stretch. So it's like Lemos I favor pretty significantly in round 1. So you're banking on Watterson to come strong in rounds 2 and round 3. I think that is probably a better live bet scenario. I think you wait after round 1 if Waterson survives, which I think she will, and Lemos, maybe lands a couple big shots, wins the round. Lemos is going to swell up to like a -500, -600 favorite. Just hop on Waterson live if you like her to come on in round 2 and round 3. I don't know if I will. I'm rooting for her, I guess, but I'm not optimistic because she's going to stay on the outside, do her karate kicks. It's like you're kind of banking on her to grapple, and I'm just not sure that she will, or even that she'll have success when she does. Maybe she lands a takedown or two. I don't really give her much of a huge edge here, even though I think she's probably the better submission grappler. So I just expect Lemos to have the bigger moments and probably get the job done. So I'll say Lemos by decision, which might be a hot take. But Watterson, like I said, very durable. So we're really banking on that durability if you're going to chase a prop by decision on Lemos. But I just think there's better fights up and down the card. And one of those better fights is the main event. We got Brian Ortega, the -175 favorite, Yair Rodriguez on the comeback at +150. And I'm on the Brian Ortega side. I haven't bet him. I probably will have some sort of action on Brian Ortega, certainly on DraftKings. I just think Brian Ortega, both guys have fought, high-level competition. I think Brian Ortega has looked better against the higher level of competition. Obviously, his only losses came against current champ Alexander Volkanovski and Max Holloway. So clearly the two best guys in the division. And then in terms of Yair Rodriguez, he's got the striking, flashy striking, got a ton of kicks, spinning elbows, flying knees. Like he's got a lot in terms of the striking. But that's really kind of all he has. And I think against a guy like Brian Ortega, who's going to have a clear wrestling advantage, Yair Rodriguez is not that difficult to take down. Ortega is obviously going to be the much better submission grappler. And that's what I keep going back to is Ortega's going to have such a clear grappling edge. And I do expect him to get this fight to the mat. So that's why I side with Brian Ortega, because Ortega, that it used to be that Ortega only had the dangerous grappling, didn't have much of wrestling, didn't have much striking. Obviously, we've seen the boxing improve by leaps and bounds his probably last couple fights here. But I still think Yair would have the advantage on the feet. I expect him to throw more volume, to land more volume. But it's not like I don't think it would be a blowout if the fight plays on the feet. The thing is I don't expect Brian Ortega to fight like he did against some of these other guys where he's willing to just stand and trade and box for 25 minutes if he needs to. I expect him to go to his wrestling, to go to his grappling. And as much as we say like, oh, well, Brian Ortega doesn't wrestle enough. Yes, he's a great grappler, but he doesn't wrestle enough. His last 3 fights, he's landed 2 or more takedowns. So we've seen him kind of improve the wrestling, not just the hands. And he's talked in interviews this week about going back to his roots. He knows what got him to this tier of the division, and that's been his grappling, his ground game. I expect that to be a clear game plan for him here. And I really just don't think Rodriguez has much resistance in terms of the takedown defense to the level that Brian Ortega is. So I expect Ortega to land takedowns here, and I think he does. Even though Yair's never been submitted to this point, I think Ortega just does get the submission victory. So we're going with Brian Ortega here by submission. I think this is a great fight to target on DraftKings. I'm going to have one side of this, maybe take a few with no main event just to get unique in the big tournament there. But I do think this is a high equity one just because I do think the winner scores very well. And I think the winner will be Brian Ortega. And as always, guys, you can check out my website, fightnumbers.com, where I have DraftKings ranking broken down by salary tier. I do ownership projections as well. There's a line movement page showing inside the distance line movement throughout the week. There's a lot of other tools and resources for MMA, DFS players, and sports bettors. It's all completely free. Check it out, fightnumbers.com. As always, hit the like button, hit that subscribe button as I continue to bring you more UFC content each and every week. Again, I apologize for the lack of quality that you guys are used to in the home studio, but we'll be back next week. Appreciate it, guys. Best of luck on Saturday.